I spent weeks preparing a room in my home for their visit. When they arrived, my daughter-in-law laughed and said, "This place smells like dust and regret." She told my son, "I'm not sleeping in a dead man's house." They left without staying a night, but days later, she received a notification that the house she cherished had been. I spent weeks getting everything ready. Weeks. I dusted corners that hadn't seen a cloth in years, polished the banister until it gleamed, and even bought new linens for the guest room. I wanted this visit to be perfect. My son Mike and his wife Jessica were coming over, and I wanted them to feel welcome. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would thaw the icy tension that had settled between us since their wedding. But the moment they stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, flung the door open and sniffed the air like I had invited a skunk instead of my family. She wrinkled her nose, a smirk curling on her face, and said the words I'll never forget. "This place smells like dust and regret." I froze mid-step. Dust and regret. My own home, where I had raised my son, where we had family dinners, where I had spent a lifetime building memories, suddenly reduced to the punchline of her cruelty. She didn't stop there. Turning to Mike, she said with that smug little tilt of her head, "I'm not sleeping in a dead man's house." Dead man's house. I caught Mike's eyes, looking uncomfortable, caught somewhere between defending his wife and appeasing me. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I wanted to scream, to tell her she had no idea what this place meant, but the words stuck in my throat. I could feel the warmth draining from my chest, leaving a cold hollow where pride and love used to sit. They didn't even stay for the night. They left, suitcases in hand, Jessica waving goodbye like she had just performed a grand exorcism. Mike didn't even look back, just left me standing there in my spotless, meticulously prepared home, feeling like I'd been stripped bare in front of the only people who mattered. I couldn't sleep that night. Every corner I had cleaned, every vase I had straightened, every little touch I had added, gone, all gone under the weight of her words. I walked through the house room by room, trying to convince myself it was just one bad visit, that maybe I was overreacting, but the sting lingered. And then I noticed it, the guest room window slightly ajar. I could have sworn I had closed it. For days after, I stayed on edge. Every sound outside made me jump. I replayed her words in my head over and over. Dust and regret. Dead man's house. My home felt like a crime scene where the crime had been committed against my heart. And then, days later, the twist that made my blood run cold. Jessica got a notification on her phone. I didn't know the details at first. She showed it to Mike while I was at work. I saw the look on his face, the mix of disbelief and panic. And I realized that the notification wasn't just about her, wasn't just some message, it was about my house. My house, the one she had mocked, the one she had refused to sleep in, had become the epicenter of something she couldn't control. I don't remember exactly what she said, only the look on her face. Eyes wide, lips parting, and that sharp inhale that comes right before you know the world has turned on you. And in that moment, a dark, cold satisfaction crept into me, the kind you only feel when someone underestimates you, when someone humiliates you, when you know that what comes next isn't luck, it's coming from you. I had already begun planning, quietly, methodically, and she didn't even know the storm heading her way. I've always been meticulous about my home. Not obsessive, not hoarder-level crazy, but precise. Every picture straight, every rug aligned, every surface clean. People called it uptight, but I called it care. This house in Arlington, Texas, had been mine for decades. My late husband, Tom, and I built it from scratch when we were newlyweds. It was more than walls and furniture. It was a repository of every memory. Birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, even the quiet Sunday afternoons when Tom would nap in the sunlit living room and I'd read on the couch. When Mike was born, I thought I'd be the perfect mom. I was protective, involved, and yes, strict. But he loved me. He still does. That's why it cut deeper when Jessica entered the picture. From day one, I sensed a tension. She wasn't like me. She wasn't nurturing or sentimental or thoughtful. She was sharp, cutting, and calculated. Her smile never reached her eyes, and her compliments always sounded like barbs. I tried to welcome her anyway. I hosted dinners, made her favorite foods, let her decorate the guest room for holidays. I even forgave the small things at first, the little digs she made about my furniture, my decor, my old-fashioned taste. I thought it was just her sense of humor. I thought maybe I was too sensitive. But over time, the digs became public, the jokes crueler, more pointed. She mocked my clothes, my cooking, my traditions in front of Mike. He would flinch, but he never stopped her. And me, I swallowed my anger, told myself it didn't matter. I wanted my son happy. But there's a limit, and she reached it the day she laughed at my home. That moment wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration. She was claiming dominance, asserting that everything I had worked for, every memory, every corner of my life was beneath her. She didn't just reject the house, she rejected me, the family, my very existence as Mike's mother. I could have lashed out then, screamed, or thrown her out, but I didn't. I didn't because anger is useless without precision. I remembered something my father once told me. You don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with patience and a plan so cold it burns them before they even notice. That stuck with me. I waited, measured, calculated. Days later, the first opportunity appeared. Jessica had always flaunted her attachment to her possessions, to control, to appearances. She wanted things shiny, pristine, Instagram-worthy. The irony that she called my home dust and regret and refused to stay in it while showing off her perfect lifestyle to the world was delicious, but only if played right. Meanwhile, Mike had changed too. He was still my son, still gentle but weak when it came to her. He wouldn't confront her, wouldn't defend me, wouldn't stand up for the home that had sheltered him. That weakness became a fuel, not a barrier. I began documenting everything. Receipts, layouts, old photographs, little quirks of the house that held history she could never understand. The house became more than a building, it became a weapon. Not a blunt one, but subtle, insidious, inevitable. And in those quiet moments, walking through the rooms she had scorned, I realized how easily she underestimated me. She didn't just look down on the house, she looked down on me. And that, I decided, was a mistake she would pay for. By the time she received the mysterious notification, the wheels of my plan were already turning. I didn't act immediately. Revenge isn't a spark, it's a slow burn. I spent the next week watching, listening, planning. Every time Jessica posted online about her perfect life in her new townhouse, I studied it. Every word she bragged about, every corner she meticulously staged gave me ammunition. She loved to show off the dream house aesthetic, the kind where everything is curated, no dust, no history, just polished surfaces and Instagram light. She hated my home because it had character, because it reminded her that real life is messy, and she couldn't control it. I started small, nothing overt. I sent a subtle email to the listing site she had used to buy her townhouse, a service she trusted. I didn't threaten, I didn't lie. I just exploited a little loophole I'd discovered in the platform's public-facing notifications. That was the first hint she got that something wasn't right. A small ding, a ping on her phone that she thought was meaningless. Meanwhile, I had to maintain the facade of normalcy with Mike. He still visited on weekends, still seemed oblivious to the storm I was building. I couldn't let him see it, not yet. He would have tried to intervene, to talk her down, to smooth over the chaos. But I wanted him out of the equation. He had no idea how cold I could be when I needed to be. I walked through my home, my dead man's house, and imagined the look on her face when she realized she had underestimated me. Every corner I touched became a piece of the trap I was laying. I cleaned again, not for her, but to remind myself that precision mattered. Every detail counted. I even left little notes, just small ones, things only I would notice, as reminders of the history she had mocked. Each memory was a brick in the foundation of what was coming. And then the escalation. I discovered she had a habit. She loved to track her property values obsessively, checking them daily. That gave me the angle. I created a subtle chain of events, nudges to make the house appear unstable, at least digitally. Notifications she received were designed to make her doubt herself, her purchase, her judgment. Little leaks in her perfect facade, ones that started to gnaw at her confidence. Mike called me a couple of times during this week. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked, concerned, hearing the tension in my voice. I just smiled calmly and told him I was taking care of things, that some people needed a lesson in humility. He didn't press further, but I could hear the worry in his tone, and I allowed myself a small, dark smile. Because the truth is, I didn't just want to humiliate her. I wanted her to feel it, to feel that smug arrogance peeling away, piece by piece, until she was as exposed and vulnerable as she made me feel in that living room when she laughed at my home. That night, I stayed up until the house was silent, planning the next phase. Each step meticulously aligned, nothing left to chance. By the time she opened that notification a few days later, it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't luck. It was the opening move in a plan she couldn't see coming. I had already anticipated her reactions, her panic, the exact words she would say. And in that anticipation, I felt power, real power, the kind that comes only when someone has completely misjudged you. She thought she had won by walking out of my house, by mocking everything I cared about. She thought the battle was over, but she didn't realize the fight had only just begun, and it would be fought on my terms. And the storm I set in motion was about to hit her, full force. I never expected it to escalate so fast. The notification hit Jessica late on a Thursday night. She texted Mike first, frantic. I didn't hear the words at first, just the raw panic in her tone when I picked up the phone. She's hacked it, Jessica whispered. Someone my house, the listing, it's... I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. Hack, not exactly, not in the way she imagined, but it didn't matter. The panic, the confusion, that was what I wanted. Here, what had actually happened. Using public property records, I discovered an obscure, overlooked clause in the home listing system she'd used. It allowed anyone with basic documentation to trigger an update to a property listing that would send notifications to the owner. Most people would ignore it, but Jessica didn't. She checked obsessively. And with a carefully timed series of small updates, nothing illegal, nothing traceable, I made her believe something catastrophic had happened with her beloved townhouse. The same townhouse she had flaunted, the same townhouse she had mocked me for comparing my home to. When she saw the first notification, she froze. Then another ping and another. Mike tried to calm her, but she was spiraling. She began packing, tapping her phone frantically, her perfect posture crumpling, and the words she shouted at him, trembling, made my satisfaction peak. "They're trying to take it from me. Someone's messing with my house. Mom, she's doing this." Mike looked at me confused, trying to figure out what I could possibly mean. I stayed calm, my tone even, letting him stew in the tension between us. I let the seeds of doubt do the work. I let Jessica's own paranoia grow, feed on itself. Then came the real twist. As she tried to call the company, I subtly pushed one more trigger, an online form that linked to her property account, redirecting to a support page. She thought it was legitimate. She typed in her credentials, and in one instant she had unwittingly handed me access, not to her finances, not to anything sensitive, but to a tiny backdoor in her notifications system. I didn't need her passwords, didn't need to hack anything. I just manipulated the alerts she relied on to obsess over her property. Within minutes, she was in full-blown panic mode. She called Mike crying, hyperventilating. "We are losing everything. I can't, it's all gone." Her voice cracked. Every ounce of control she had prided herself on evaporated. Mike looked at me helplessly, like I was the villain. But in reality, I was just the force she had underestimated, the ghost she laughed at in my dusty, dead man's house. And she didn't even realize it yet. By the next morning, Jessica was exhausted, panicked, and completely obsessed with her notifications. Every sound in her townhouse made her jump. She wouldn't sleep, she wouldn't eat properly. She was unraveling exactly as I had anticipated. And that's when I learned something I hadn't expected. Something that didn't just shock me, it changed the entire trajectory of what I was planning. As I scrolled through her messages that morning, trying to anticipate her next move, I saw a message from her friend, a name I didn't recognize. A casual text, but the contents were explosive. "She's not doing this alone. Mike's friend, the one you've never trusted, he's helping her manipulate the listing. They've been planning this for months. They never liked you, and now they have the system on their side." I froze. My carefully laid plan, built on precision and patience, suddenly collided with a revelation I hadn't foreseen. She wasn't the only enemy. Someone else, someone close to Mike, had been feeding her, getting her obsession, amplifying the chaos. And in that instant, I realized that my revenge wasn't just about Jessica anymore. It was about uncovering the full network of people who had looked down on me, dismissed me, and mocked my life. I was no longer just planning a single strike. I was planning a war. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, the quiet of my dead man's house settling over me like a shroud, and I thought about the network she'd built against me. It wasn't just Jessica, it was Mike's friend, Kevin, who had always seemed a little too eager to undermine me, and a handful of others who had laughed at my home, my life, my traditions. They thought they were untouchable. That's when I realized I couldn't just retaliate against Jessica. I had to dismantle every piece of her fortress, brick by brick, without anyone seeing it coming. First, I mapped out her habits. I knew her routines almost as well as she did. When she checked her phone obsessively, what alerts she trusted without question, who she called first when panic set in. I even dug through public records, social media, old forum posts, anything that could give me leverage. By the end of the night, I had a full dossier on her, her allies, and every weakness in her little empire of perfection. Then I turned to Mike. I knew he'd always been the buffer between her and me, trying to calm storms that didn't need calming, but he couldn't save her this time. I carefully framed it so that he would be distracted, kept him busy at work and errands, leaving Jessica isolated and vulnerable. Isolation amplifies panic, it always has. Next, I crafted the notifications I would send her, the illusions I would manipulate to keep her off balance. Each ping, each alert would reinforce the narrative that her precious house, the one she flaunted, polished, and bragged about, was unstable, at risk, slipping beyond her control. I didn't have to touch her finances, didn't have to break any laws. All I needed was the perception, the panic, the fear of losing something she couldn't replace. Then came the more intricate part, planting seeds that would make her question her closest allies. I sent carefully worded messages to Kevin, knowing he would forward them to Jessica, suggesting that someone was betraying her from inside her own circle. Paranoia is contagious. It spreads faster than any virus. She would start seeing threats where none existed, turning her friends into suspects in her mind. I also began documenting everything meticulously. Screenshots, logs, records of notifications, timestamps. If she tried to fight back legally or socially, I wanted the narrative fully in my control. Every move I made had to be invisible yet undeniable in its impact. She had mocked me publicly, humiliated me in front of my son, and that arrogance had made her careless. I would exploit it. Finally, I set the timeline. I didn't want immediate chaos, I wanted the slow, inevitable buildup of fear. Panic that gnawed at her every waking hour. Every alert, every minor problem would compound until she felt completely unmoored. And then, when she was most desperate, most unbalanced, that's when the real twist would hit. Something she would never anticipate because she didn't understand me, my patience, or my capacity for subtle cruelty. I looked around the house, the same rooms she had mocked. Every dusted corner, every polished surface, every little keepsake of my family's history suddenly felt like armor. This house had always been more than walls and furniture. It was a repository of memories, of power, of knowledge she had underestimated, and now it was my weapon. By the end of the night, I had the plan in full. The notifications were queued. Kevin had unknowingly been set up to play his part. Mike remained oblivious, just a pawn keeping the emotional stakes high. And Jessica, well, she was about to feel the first real taste of what it meant to underestimate someone like me. But I didn't know at that moment that one detail, one small oversight, would turn everything upside down. It hit me 2 days later. I had been monitoring Jessica obsessively, watching the panic build exactly as I predicted. She was checking her phone every few minutes, flinching at every ping, jumping at every notification. Kevin was oblivious to his role in my orchestration, and Mike still hadn't caught on. Everything was unfolding perfectly, or so I thought. Then I received a call from the property notification system itself. A real, urgent call this time, not the simulated pings I'd been sending. My stomach sank as the voice on the other end spoke. "Ma'am, we've received an alert that someone attempting to manipulate your account. We believe there may be a security breach from within your household's network." I froze. My plan was supposed to be invisible. No trace, no system alert, nothing. But suddenly, the carefully constructed digital facade had tripped a real-world alarm. My mind raced. How could this happen? I had used only publicly available loopholes. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable. And then I realized the truth, the thing I hadn't seen coming. Kevin hadn't just been forwarding messages to Jessica. He had been monitoring everything behind the scenes, too. Months earlier, Jessica had confided in him about her desire to control all notifications related to the house. Kevin, eager to impress, had set up a secondary alert system, one I hadn't accounted for. Every subtle nudge I had sent her, every manipulated notification, had also been logged in Kevin's real-time monitoring system. Suddenly, my meticulously laid plan teetered on the edge of exposure. Jessica could have gone to the company, or worse, Mike could have stumbled across my activities before the final payoff. I felt a cold panic creep up my spine. Years of patience, hours of meticulous planning, could unravel in an instant. But here's the twist: I didn't back down. I adapted. I turned their oversight into my advantage. Kevin's monitoring system had alerted them to suspicious activity, but it was too late. They didn't understand that every single notification they were obsessing over had already conditioned Jessica. She was already unraveling emotionally. The fear, the paranoia, the gnawing dread, they were all mine to control. I recalibrated the next stage. Instead of hiding, I became the ghost of the house in her notifications. Every ping now reinforced the illusion that her precious townhouse was crumbling under invisible forces. I introduced minor inconsistencies in her daily alerts, changes in service schedules, phantom reports of minor maintenance issues, false neighborhood warnings. Each one seemed random to her, but I knew exactly how she would interpret them, as proof that her perfect life was slipping away. The beauty of it was that Kevin, despite his monitoring, became an unwitting amplifier. Every time he tried to check for errors, he inadvertently reinforced her belief that something was truly wrong. She wasn't seeing a pattern, I was the only one seeing the pattern. Every step I had taken, every quiet hour spent dusting corners she had mocked, every memory of this house, was now fueling the panic of someone who had believed she could laugh at me and walk away unscathed. And then the final twist came, the moment I realized she had no idea how completely she had underestimated me. She didn't know that my late husband's meticulous record-keeping, the hidden historical data I had tucked away for years, and the knowledge of her obsessive personality were all tools I had been wielding without her noticing. She had mocked a house. She had mocked me. And now she was trapped in a digital illusion of her own making, orchestrated by someone she thought she could never fear. By the time she realized the notifications weren't random, it would be too late. But what she didn't know, what Mike didn't know, was that there was one more revelation I had been keeping from everyone. One final piece of my revenge that would redefine everything she thought she understood about me, about my home, and about the consequences of underestimating a mother scorned. And that final piece, it was about to hit her harder than anything I had set in motion so far. There's something I haven't said yet, something I kept buried, even from Mike, because I knew the moment it came out, nothing would ever be the same again. Jessica thought she understood what she was mocking when she stood in my doorway and called this place a dead man's house. She thought she was just being cruel, just making a point about outdated furniture and old smells, but she didn't know what she had actually stepped into. This house wasn't just where my husband died. It was where everything started. Tom didn't just build this house with me. He designed it with a level of precision most people would call obsessive. He was an engineer, but not the kind that just followed rules. He liked systems, control. He believed that every structure, every space could be layered with intention, hidden redundancies, records, safeguards. After he passed, I inherited everything, not just the house but his habits, his records, his systems, boxes of documentation, years of detailed notes about property law, zoning quirks, digital integration systems as they evolved. Things I didn't fully understand at the time, but I kept them, I organized them, I learned, slowly, quietly over years. Jessica saw dust, I saw infrastructure. And here's the part that changes everything. Months before that disastrous visit, before the insults, before she ever laughed in my face, Jessica and Mike had come to me with an offer. They wanted to help me move out, said the house was too big, too old, too much for me to maintain. They framed it as concern, but I saw through it. Jessica wanted the land, not the house, the land. At the time, I pretended to consider it. I even let them believe I was warming up to the idea. But that's when I started digging deeper into Tom's old files. That's when I found something neither of them knew. A clause buried in the original property structuring. The land my house sits on, it's tied to a conditional historical designation request Tom had quietly filed decades ago. It was never finalized, but it was never closed either. A dormant status. One that, if activated properly, could trigger a full review of surrounding properties, zoning restrictions, and digital listing freezes within a certain radius. Including Jessica's townhouse. She didn't just randomly choose that place. It's less than a mile from here. Same development expansion zone, same underlying land records. She thought she was escaping my dead man's house. In reality, she had anchored herself right next to it. Everything I've been doing, the notifications, the pressure, the illusion of instability, it wasn't just psychological. It was preparation. I had already begun the process of activating that dormant clause. Quiet filings, old records resurfaced, requests submitted under my legal right as the original co-owner. The system doesn't move fast, but once it starts, it doesn't stop easily. Those errors she's seeing, they're not all fake anymore. Some of them are real, early ripples. Internal flags being raised as the review process quietly begins in the background. Kevin doesn't understand it. Mike doesn't understand it. Jessica definitely doesn't. She thinks she's being targeted. She thinks she's losing control because of some invisible enemy. But the truth is far worse. She walked into my home, insulted me, and then went back to a house that was already sitting on the fault line I was about to rupture. And now it's too late to stop it. Because the final phase isn't about notifications, it's not about fear. It's about making sure she understands exactly what she tried to take from me, right before she loses it herself. By the time Jessica understood what was really happening, the process was already too far along to stop. It started with an official letter, not one of my subtle manipulations, not a fake notification, a real one county-issued, stamped and delivered to her door. It referenced a pending historical and zoning review, affecting her property and several others in the development zone. It used language she didn't fully understand, but the words that mattered were clear. Property status under review, transactions temporarily restricted, structural and land use compliance subject to reassessment. She called Mike in a panic. Again, but this time her voice wasn't sharp or arrogant, it was breaking. Why is this happening? Why our house? Mike didn't have answers. He came to me that night, standing in the same living room where she had laughed just weeks earlier. I could see it in his face, fear, confusion, and finally, suspicion. "Mom, did you do something?" I didn't lie, I didn't soften it. I just looked at him and said, I protected what's mine. That was the moment it clicked for him, that everything unfolding around Jessica wasn't random. It was deliberate, measured, earned. Meanwhile, Jessica's perfect world started collapsing in slow, methodical pieces. The townhouse she had flaunted online was suddenly flagged in multiple systems. Real estate platforms showed warnings. Potential buyers backed off immediately when she tried to quietly list it. Even refinancing options froze. And then came the inspections. Not dramatic, not explosive, just relentless. Officials scheduling visits, requests for documentation, questions about structural compliance tied to broader land use history. None of it was illegal, none of it fabricated. It was all rooted in that dormant clause Tom had left behind, and I had awakened. Jessica couldn't spin it. She couldn't filter it through social media. There's no aesthetic way to present uncertainty, to post about losing control. The silence on her account said everything. Kevin tried to intervene, tried to fix it with his systems and alerts, but this wasn't something you could manipulate from a laptop. This was real, bureaucratic, slow and crushing. The kind of pressure that doesn't explode, it suffocates. A week later, she showed up at my door, alone. No smirk, no attitude, just hollow eyes and a tight grip on her phone like it was the only thing holding her together. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. About the land, about any of it. I let her stand there, let the silence stretch, let her feel exactly what I had felt when she stood in this same doorway and reduced my life to dust and regret. "You didn't want to know," I finally said. "You just wanted it." Her composure cracked then. "We can fix this," she said quickly. "You can stop it, right? Just withdraw whatever you filed." "No," I said, calm, final. Because that was the truth. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't just undo it now. The review had momentum, and more importantly, I didn't want to. She looked past me into the house like she was seeing it for the first time. The polished floors, the carefully kept rooms, the history she had mocked. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I believed her, that's the thing. I actually believed she meant it. But it didn't matter. Because some lines once crossed don't get erased. She left without another word, and this time I didn't watch her go with heartbreak. I watched with something colder, settled. In the weeks that followed, her situation only worsened. The townhouse lost value, the restrictions tightened, what she once bragged about became a burden she couldn't escape. And my house, still standing clean, solid, untouched. Not a dead man's house. A house that outlived the people who underestimated it. And the woman who protected it.